Hello, everyone. I'm really glad you're here. Tonight, I want to help you let go of the day and ease into rest. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, and it means a lot to be part of your nightly routine. So if you haven't already, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It truly helps. Now, settle in, close your eyes, and let's begin. Story number 1. It was a quiet night. The kind of night that made you feel like the world had finally taken a breath. The air was cool, a bit heavy with humidity, and the dull yellow glow from the gas station lights created soft shadows that stretched out across the empty pavement. I was alone, working the night shift, watching time crawl through the dark hours. Most of my shift was uneventful. A few customers trickled in, truckers grabbing coffee, locals fueling up, the occasional silent driver who stared too long before driving off. But then around 2:30 a.m., everything changed. I stepped out for a moment to breathe, just outside the glass doors. That's when I noticed them. Figures standing still beneath the tree line across the street. They weren't moving, just watching. I told myself it was my imagination, the mind playing tricks in the night, but they stayed, motionless, unblinking. I went back inside, locking the door behind me. From the safety of the counter, I glanced out the window. They were still there, at least 4 of them, maybe 5. No flashlights, no movement, just outlines, too dark to make out any detail. I picked up the phone to call the police, but I stopped. What would I even say? There are people standing in the woods. It didn't feel like enough, so I waited. Tried to shake off the fear, focused on the low hum of the fridge, the tick of the clock, the buzz of a fly tapping against the fluorescent lights. An hour passed. They hadn't moved. My stomach sank every time I looked up. I kept thinking, what do they want? Why are they just standing there? Why not come inside? Why not leave? The stillness was worse than action. It was unnatural. Then, at exactly 3:34 a.m., they disappeared. Not walked away, not faded into the woods, just gone. I hadn't looked away. I hadn't blinked. They were there, and then they weren't. My heart started pounding, louder than the silence. I rushed to the door, flicked the lock, stepped outside again to be sure. The night smelled the same, heavy with earth and old leaves, but the air felt wrong, charged. I looked around, my breath catching in my throat. Not a soul. Not a sound, just the breeze whispering through the trees. I forced myself to laugh, to dismiss it, to pretend I was still in control of my reality, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Something had happened, something that didn't belong to the normal world. Later, a customer came in, a guy in his 30s, heavy boots, trucker hat pulled low. He looked at me for a long time, then said, "You see them too?" My blood froze. I didn't answer. I just stared. He nodded slowly, buying a pack of gum and a coffee, then leaned in. They don't like the light, but they like watchers. He walked out without another word, and I never saw him again. For weeks after that, I avoided the window during my shift. I couldn't bear to look across the road, afraid I'd see them again, or afraid I wouldn't. Both thoughts filled me with dread. There was no comfort either way. My nights were changed. Sleep stopped coming easily. Even at home, behind locked doors and curtains drawn, I'd feel that gaze, those unseen eyes from the woods. Sometimes I'd hear soft tapping on the glass, a pattern with no rhythm, no wind. I lived in a constant state of waiting, waiting for them to return, waiting for them to explain why they came, or worse, what they were looking for. People would tell me I was tired, hallucinating from too many long shifts, but I know what I saw. I know how it felt. There's a weight to real fear, a texture to it. You don't forget that. You carry it in your chest like cold lead. Eventually, I quit the job. I couldn't stay there. Every creak, every shadow became too much. The new guy who took over asked me about the rumors, the ones some of the locals had been whispering about for years. Figures in the trees, strange disappearances, the way time felt slower near that gas station. I just told him to keep the lights on and never look too long out the window. He laughed at that, like I had made a joke. Maybe he thought I was crazy. That's fine. I would have thought the same thing before that night. You don't believe these things until they happen to you. It's been almost a year since I left, and still I don't sleep through the night. Sometimes I dream I'm back there, standing behind the glass, watching them watch me. In those dreams I can't move. I can't speak. I just stand there, frozen like they were, locked in some mirror of dread. And when I wake, I always check the window. It doesn't matter where I am, I have to look. And sometimes I think I see something move, just out of view, a silhouette, a flicker, something watching back. But when I blink, it's gone. Or I hope it is. I never talked to the police, never filed a report. What would I say? That a group of shadowy figures stood in the trees for an hour without moving, that they vanished into thin air, that a stranger confirmed what I saw and warned me they liked watchers. There's no place for that in a report. No line on the form for that kind of fear. It belongs to a different reality, one that lives between what we see and what we don't want to. And once you see it, you can't go back. You carry it with you. In the silence, in the dark, in the moments when your eyes drift toward the edge of the woods and wonder, what's watching you? People ask me now if I believe in ghosts or demons or aliens. I don't know how to answer. All I can say is this: there are things out there that don't fit into names or stories or science. Things that don't need to move to make you feel hunted. Things that don't follow rules. Maybe they're old. Maybe they're always watching. Maybe they're just curious. Or maybe we're the anomaly and they're the normal ones. Maybe they're wondering why we stare into the dark and pretend we're alone. That's what scares me the most. Not that they exist, but that they might be just another part of the world we choose not to see. Story number 2. It started with a road trip, the kind you take when you're tired of your routine and need something different to breathe again. I was driving cross-country, heading west with no real timeline, no strict plans, just me, the open road, and the soundtrack of an old playlist humming through worn speakers. It was late one evening when I took a wrong turn somewhere in Kansas, the kind of turn you don't notice until miles later when the sky darkens and you realize you haven't seen another car in half an hour. I wasn't lost, exactly. I had GPS after all, but the road felt off. The trees leaned too close to the pavement and the headlights didn't reach far enough. I passed a battered sign that read, "Welcome to Dry Creek," though the town didn't show up on my map. I figured I'd stop and refuel, grab a snack and be on my way before night got too deep. Place I had lived in for some time. As I pulled into the center of town, I noticed how empty it all felt. There were buildings, an old diner, a post office, a church with a broken bell, but no people, no movement, no light in any window. I drove slowly, headlights sweeping over cracked pavement and faded storefronts. Something about the silence made me feel like I'd driven into a memory that had forgotten itself. Still, I was tired. I pulled into what looked like a motel, the sign hanging sideways and the parking lot overgrown. But the office light was on. I stepped inside and was greeted by an elderly man with kind eyes and a stiff smile. He didn't ask for ID, just handed me a key and said, "Room 8, keep the blinds closed, no matter what you hear." I should have left right then, but exhaustion makes you ignore red flags. I nodded, took the key and drove around the back to the room. It was small and smelled of dust and wood smoke, but it was warm and quiet. I didn't even unpack, just lay on the bed and close my eyes. That's when I heard it. A scratching sound, like long nails on glass. I sat up, heart pounding, and listened. It came again, Pause. Scratch. I approached the window, remembering the old man's warning. I didn't open the blinds. I didn't need to. The silhouette on the other side was enough to freeze my blood, tall, hunched, and wrong in its proportions. It didn't move, just pressed its form against the glass as if listening. I backed away slowly, breath caught in my throat, heart thundering in my chest. The scratching stopped. Silence returned, heavy and complete. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the chair facing the window, gripping a lamp like a weapon, flinching at every creak of the floorboards. At dawn, I hurried out. The man at the desk was gone. So was his chair, so was the key. It was like the place had swallowed him up. I got in my car and drove, fast, not even looking in the rear-view mirror, like Creek didn't appear on my GPS. When I tried to pin it later, the screen glitched and reset itself. No record, no coordinates, just a gap where something should be. I tried to convince myself I dreamed it, or hallucinated it, or imagined it out of loneliness and exhaustion. But deep down, I knew better. The next day I found strange markings on the passenger side of my car. Long, thin grooves, almost like runes, burned into the metal. I hadn't noticed them before. I traced my fingers along them and felt a deep chill radiating from the surface. Not cold from the air, but from something else, something beneath. Since then, I've had dreams, the same dream over and over. I'm driving, the road stretches endlessly forward, and the sky is always just a little too dark. I pass that sign, "Welcome to Dry Creek," and I hear a voice say, "You came back." I always wake up sweating, the echo of those words burning in my ears. I started doing research, trying to find old records or local legends. I even posted in a few forums about abandoned towns and roadside horror. A few people responded, cautiously, privately. One said their grandfather had mentioned Dry Creek once, called it a cursed place where time stops and people disappear. Another claimed it had been evacuated decades ago after a mining collapse unleashed something from beneath the earth. There was no consistency in the stories, only one recurring phrase, "Don't stay past sunset." It echoed the warning from the motel man, and it made my skin crawl. Because I had stayed. I had watched the shadows grow long. I had heard the scratching. Ever since that night, I've felt followed. I'll see reflections that aren't mine in windows I walk past. I'll catch glimpses of a tall, crooked figure in the periphery of my vision, always vanishing when I turn. Sometimes I'll wake up to find scratches on the inside of my bedroom window, though I live on the 3rd floor. Sometimes I'll hear soft whispering, just as I drift off to sleep, and I can never quite catch the words, but they sound like my name. Friends say I'm stressed, that I need rest or therapy. Maybe they're right. But there's something else, something I can't shake, a sense that I didn't just drive into Dry Creek. I brought part of it back with me. No, I avoid long drives. I keep my blinds shut at night. I stop going on road trips, stop exploring back roads, stop trusting detours. Because sometimes detours are traps. Sometimes a wrong turn isn't a mistake. It's an invitation, and once you accept it, something accepts you back. I've thought about going back, trying to find the town again, to prove it to myself, to face it, but I know I won't. I'm too afraid of what I'll find, or what will find me. Some roads shouldn't be taken twice, some towns shouldn't exist, and some stories, no matter how much time passes, keep scratching at the glass. They say ghosts are echoes of the past, trapped in places they once knew, but Dry Creek didn't feel like a place haunted by people. It felt like a place that was a ghost itself, a town caught between realities, living on borrowed time, feeding off the curious and the lost. I wonder how many others have driven that road and never come back. How many rooms in that motel have sat occupied by the scared and sleepless. I wonder if the man at the front desk was real or just a mask worn by something older, something that needed permission to enter. And I wonder, late at night, if it's already inside. Story number 3. It was the kind of summer night that wrapped the world in warm stillness, where even the insects buzzed lazily and time felt suspended. I had just moved into a small rental house at the edge of town, close to the woods but still technically inside city limits. The neighborhood was quiet, too quiet maybe. No kids playing in the yard, no dogs barking in the distance, just silence that stretched a little too long. I was unpacking late into the evening, not in a rush, letting the newness of the place settle in. Around 11 p.m. I stepped outside to take out the trash. The air smelled like pine and old soil, thick and earthy. That's when I noticed something that hadn't been there earlier, a swing hanging from a low tree branch at the edge of my backyard, gently swaying, though there was no breeze. I froze, staring at it for a long minute, unsure if it had always been there or if something had changed. Curiosity overruled caution, and I walked closer. The swing looked handmade, 2 thick ropes and a wooden plank worn smooth at the edges, hanging too low to be practical for a child. I looked around. No movement. I glanced up into the tree, saw nothing unusual, then turned back toward the house. As I did, I heard it. The creaking of the swing moving again, slowly, rhythmically. I turned sharply, but it was still, hanging motionless. The sound had stopped. I blinked, heart beating a little faster. Maybe it was my imagination, or maybe the ropes were just settling. I shrugged it off and went inside, locking the door behind me. I didn't look out the window again that night. The next morning, I found footprints in the dirt near the swing. Small ones, barefoot. They led from the edge of the woods to the swing and then nowhere. No return trail, just one direction. They weren't mine, and I hadn't had visitors. I stood there in the early light, the dew still clinging to the grass, and tried to reason it out. Maybe kids had come through during the night, maybe it was a prank. I cleared the prints with a rake and went about my day, trying not to let it bother me, but something had shifted. I began to feel like I wasn't alone in the house. At night I'd hear soft footsteps upstairs, despite having no second floor. I'd hear what sounded like laughter, distant and light, like it was coming through a long hallway that didn't exist. One night, just after midnight, I woke to the sound of the swing creaking again. This time I didn't wait. I rushed to the window and looked out. In the pale moonlight, I saw a figure sitting on it, small, a child, maybe 6 or 7, her long hair covering her face, her white dress stained with something dark. She wasn't swinging, just sitting, still. I couldn't see her face, but I knew she knew I was watching, and then, as if she had heard my thoughts, her head tilted ever so slightly toward the house. I stumbled back from the window, chest tight, panic rising. When I looked again, she was gone. No footsteps, no rustling in the grass, just emptiness. I barely slept that night, and when I did, I dreamt of the swing. I saw it hanging not from a tree but from the ceiling of my bedroom, creaking in slow motion. I saw the girl again, but this time she was closer, sitting on my bed, whispering something I couldn't understand. When I woke, the room was cold, unnaturally so. My breath hung in the air, and the window, though closed, was covered in condensation from the inside. I felt watched, followed, haunted by something I couldn't see in full. Every object in the house seemed touched by it. Light bulbs would flicker, faucets would turn on by themselves. The swing creaked even when there was no wind. I started sleeping with the lights on. I asked around the neighborhood, but no one would say much. One older woman, watering her plants, gave me a sad look and told me not to go into the woods. That's all she said. I found an old article in the town archives about a girl who had gone missing from the property decades ago. Her name was Sarah. She had vanished one evening while playing outside. The last thing anyone had seen was her sitting on a swing her father had built for her. Before she disappeared into the trees, they never found her. Just the swing, still creaking. The same swing now in my yard. The photo in the article was grainy, but I recognized the dress. I tried to have the swing taken down. I even cut the ropes, but the next day it was hanging again. New ropes, same plank, same spot, like it never left. I considered moving, breaking the lease, getting out before whatever this was got worse. But something held me there, a sense of unfinished business, or maybe guilt, though I didn't know why. I began to talk to her, not out loud, but in my mind. I'd sit by the window and think her name. I'd apologized for not understanding, for not helping, for being afraid. And on the nights when I did that, the swing wouldn't move. The house would stay quiet. It was as if acknowledging her gave her peace. Or maybe it just kept her from getting angry. Over time, I started to feel less afraid. The footsteps faded, the laughter stopped, the cold spots disappeared. But the swing remained. Always there. Always gently swaying in the morning fog. I never saw her again, not fully, but I'd feel her, like a breeze brushing past, like a memory trying to speak. And in a strange way, I began to find comfort in that. Like she was protecting the house, not haunting it. Like her presence was a whisper, not a scream, a lost child, reaching out, not to scare, but to be remembered. And I remember her. Every day, every time the swing moves, I whisper her name. Now, whenever someone visits, I tell them to leave the swing alone. Don't touch it, don't sit on it, just let it be. Some stories don't need endings. Some spirits don't want to be released. They want to be seen. And that's enough. Maybe the world is full of little hauntings like this. Reminders that not everything lost is gone. That some things remain, not out of malice, but out of love. I think Sarah just wants not to be forgotten, and so I remember her in the creak of the swing, in the hush of the woods, in the silence that falls right before sleep. Story number 4. I took the job because it paid well and didn't ask too many questions. Night security at an old office building on the outskirts of town. Nothing special, nothing glamorous, just 12 hours of silence, flickering monitors, and routine patrols. The building had once been a hub for some insurance company in the 70s, now mostly abandoned, except for a few storage rooms and records that needed protection. It was supposed to be easy. Just show up at 8 p.m, lock the doors, walk the halls every hour, and watch the cameras in between. No staff, no visitors, no real danger. But it didn't take long before I realized something about the building didn't want to be watched. It wanted to watch you. And when you look back, it made sure you felt it. The first night was uneventful, and the second passed with nothing more than creaky floorboards and the distant hum of air vents. But by the third night, strange things began happening, small at first. The lights in Corridor B would flicker exactly at 2:13 a.m. each time I passed. A soft buzzing came from one of the unplugged monitors. A faint knock would echo through the stairwell when no one was there. At first, I assumed it was just the age of the place. Old wiring, temperature shifts, acoustics. That was until I saw something on the camera feed that couldn't be explained. On monitor 6, which showed the break room, a chair slowly moved away from the table. There was no one in the building but me, and I was watching the feed live. My heart pounded in my ears. I rewound the footage, but the moment was gone. It had erased itself. I started taking notes, writing down every anomaly I encountered, the time, the place, the detail, like I could somehow make sense of the pattern. But the more I tried to understand, the worse it became. One night, while doing a routine patrol, I walked into Corridor C and heard footsteps behind me. Not faint, not subtle, definite, deliberate steps, like boots on tile. I turned, flashlight beam trembling slightly, but no one was there. The air felt thick, like it was pressing in from all sides. And then the power went out. Just for a second. Long enough for me to feel utterly alone, and then not alone at all. When the lights came back, every door in the corridor was ajar by exactly the same angle. The next time I watched the cameras, I saw something that still makes my skin crawl. On monitor 3, which covered the lobby, there was a figure, tall, hunched, featureless. It didn't walk, it glided. It passed directly through the locked front doors without touching them. I froze. I couldn't move. I just watched it slide across the screen and disappear behind the reception desk. I ran down there as fast as I could, flashlight and keys jangling, but the lobby was empty. No doors were opened, no signs of entry, and yet the temperature had dropped significantly. My breath came out in mist, and a light dusting of frost had gathered on the metal handle of the reception bell. I wanted to quit. I almost did, but curiosity is a dangerous thing. I convinced myself I needed proof, real evidence. So I brought a voice recorder, left it running in corridor C where most of the activity occurred. The next morning I played it back. The first hour was silent, then came whispers. Not one voice, but many, layered on top of each other, speaking in a language I couldn't recognize. I replayed it a dozen times, each time hearing something different. Sometimes my name, sometimes crying, sometimes laughter. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I lived from shift to shift, drawn deeper into the strangeness of the building, like it was pulling threads from my mind, one by. One night, I heard the elevator ding. That was impossible. Power to the elevator had been shut off years ago, but the light above the shaft was glowing and the doors slowly opened to reveal nothing. An empty box. But the floor indicator kept changing, even though no one was inside. I stepped closer, unable to resist. The doors began to close, slowly, like they were waiting for me. At the last second, I reached in and pressed the button to open them again. They didn't respond. Instead, the light above flickered out, and the elevator sank into darkness. Later, I checked the footage. The camera that pointed at the elevator had gone black during the entire episode. People began to ask if I was okay. I wasn't. I looked pale, drawn, tired beyond reason. I couldn't explain what was happening, not without sounding insane, so I said nothing. But I knew. I knew the building was watching me. I'd see reflections of movement behind me in dark glass. I'd hear someone say "hey" in a voice identical to mine. I'd walk into a room and find objects rearranged in subtle, precise ways. A pencil rotated a quarter turn. A coffee cup moved to the floor once. I returned from a patrol to find the surveillance monitors all showing live footage of my own face, from angles that didn't exist. Eventually, the line between my shift and my dreams vanished. I'd wake up in bed, unsure if I was still at work. I'd hear the elevator in my apartment building and flinch. The smell of dust and stale coffee would follow me home. I started seeing the figure from the camera in mirrors, always standing in the background, just far enough to question my sanity. I told myself it couldn't follow me, but I think it already had. Whatever the building held, it didn't need walls to keep it in. It needed attention. It fed on it, and I had given it mine. Fully and completely. I don't work there anymore. I left without notice, left my badge on the desk and walked out into the sunrise without a single look back. But sometimes, late at night, I'll hear the elevator ding, or see that same layout in my dreams, the hallways, the flickering lights, the shadow that moves like a question left unanswered. The building still exists, still stands, hollow and cold. But I think part of me stayed there, or maybe something from there stayed with me, something that waits, something that watches. And when I close my eyes at night, I still see Monitor 3, still see the lobby, still see the figure gliding through the door, like it was never locked to begin with. Story number 5. I had just started college in a small town, tucked between endless cornfields and winding 2-lane roads that always seemed to lead back to the same place. It wasn't much. An old campus with ivy-covered buildings and flickering street lamps that looked like they belonged in another century. I had rented a studio apartment off campus, cheap and small, but mine. The first few weeks were filled with late-night studying, vending machine dinners, and adjusting to the strange quiet that blanketed the town after dark. But one night, something changed. I was walking home from the library around 11 p.m, backpack heavy, the night cool and still. I took a shortcut down a narrow alley that sliced between two abandoned dorm buildings, thinking nothing of it, until I heard footsteps behind me, slow, steady, deliberate. I turned quickly, expecting to see another student, maybe someone else walking home, but the alley was empty. My own footsteps echoed back at me, the sound bouncing off brick and concrete. I stood still for a moment, waiting, scanning the shadows, heart beating a little faster. Nothing. I continued walking, a little quicker this time. The moment I moved, the footsteps returned, matching mine just slightly off. I stopped. They stopped. I ran the rest of the way home, burst through the door, and locked it behind me without turning on the lights. My breath caught in my chest, listening, but there was only silence now. The kind that stretches out longer than it should, like the world is holding its breath. That was the first night. The next few passed quietly, but the feeling lingered. I avoided the alley. I started looking over my shoulder without realizing it. I began sleeping with a light on, though I told myself it was just nerves, just stress. But then, the knocking began. Soft taps on the front door, always at the same time, 3:03 a.m. At first I ignored it, too afraid to check. But on the third night, I looked through the peephole. No one. Just the empty hallway and the buzzing yellow light overhead. But the knocking continued, always soft, always steady. I set up a small camera facing the door, hoping to catch whoever was messing with me. The footage the next morning showed nothing. No one there, no movement, just the sound of the knocks without a visible source. Sleep became a rare luxury. My classes started to slip. I'd sit through lectures with bloodshot eyes, barely able to focus. I stopped going out at night entirely. But whatever it was, it didn't stay at the door. One evening, while reading in bed, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Just a shadow at first, across the wall, like someone had walked past the lamp. But I lived alone, and the windows were shut tight. I turned the light off. The room plunged into darkness, and in the silence I heard breathing, not mine, slower and heavier, from the far corner of the room. I turned the light back on, and it stopped. The corner was empty, but something had been there. I could feel the heat of its gaze, like a pressure on my skin. I started researching local legends, desperate for some explanation. A few forums mentioned a watcher, a presence that attaches itself to people rather than places. No one agreed on where it came from or what it wanted, only that once it noticed you, it didn't stop watching. One post mentioned that it liked corners, that it stayed where light met shadow, that it fed off attention. The more you acknowledged it, the stronger it became. I stopped reading after that. I couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate, couldn't stop listening. Every creak of the floor, every rustle of fabric felt deliberate. My apartment no longer felt like a space I lived in. It felt like something else's territory. One night I decided to confront it. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe madness. I turned off every light in the apartment and sat in the center of the room, eyes closed, waiting. I whispered, "I know you're here." The room answered with silence, so heavy it rang in my ears. And then came a whisper. Not a word, just a breath. A long, slow exhale from directly behind me. I didn't turn. I couldn't. My body was frozen, every hair standing on end. I stayed there until the morning light crept through the blinds, and even then I was afraid to open my eyes. When I did, nothing was there, but the air felt different, like the temperature had dropped several degrees overnight. I moved out a week later, told the landlord it was a personal emergency, packed only what I needed, left furniture, dishes, even clothes behind. I found another place across town, in a building filled with people, with noise and music and life. For a while, things felt better. No knocking, no shadows, no whispers. But sometimes, late at night, I'd catch a glimpse of something just outside the frame of a mirror, a movement that didn't match mine, a shadow that didn't belong to any object. And once, while walking past an alley, I heard footsteps matching mine again, slightly delayed. I never turned around, I just walked faster. Now I keep all the lights on at night. I sleep with headphones in, white noise playing to drown out any sound. I avoid mirrors after sunset. I never walk alone if I can help it. But I still feel it, watching. It doesn't need a place, it needs attention. And once you've given it that, even once, it remembers you. It finds you, through silence, through darkness, through corners. It waits, and when you're at your weakest, when you think it's finally gone, that's story number 6. I've always been a night owl, the kind of person who finds peace in silence when the rest of the world has gone to sleep. That's why I took the overnight cleaning job at the city's oldest courthouse. It was quiet work, mopping marble floors, emptying trash bins, dusting oak-panelled courtrooms. The building was majestic during the day, but at night it became something else. The ceilings loomed higher, the corridors stretched longer, and every sound echoed just a little too loud. On my first night, the supervisor handed me a ring of keys, a flashlight, and a warning, spoken with a half smile. Don't go down to the basement unless you have to. I laughed nervously and nodded, figuring it was just a joke meant to spook the newbie. I would later understand he wasn't joking. The first week was uneventful. I'd listen to music while working, enjoying the solitude. But slowly, the building started to feel alive, not in a mystical sense, but as if it was reacting to my presence. Doors I had closed would swing open, light switches would flick off behind me, the elevator, out of service for years, dinged occasionally in the early hours, even though no power ran to it. I told myself it was just an old building settling, its age betraying its secrets, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. Then came the night I left my phone upstairs. I was on the first floor and realized I had left it on the bench in courtroom 2. When I returned to get it, the courtroom door was open, though I had closed and locked it only minutes before. Inside, the room was dark, except for moonlight filtering through the stained glass windows. My phone was there, sitting exactly where I'd left it, but next to it was a file, a manila folder, old and yellowed, full of documents I hadn't placed there. I opened it slowly. Inside were black and white photographs of people I didn't recognize, mugshots it seemed. Each had a name written in red ink, and every photo had a large X across the face. The air grew colder as I turned the pages. Then I heard it, a low creaking, like someone shifting their weight on the bench behind me. I turned, heart in my throat, but saw no one. I grabbed my phone, left the file behind, and walked out without finishing my shift. The next day, I considered quitting, but I needed the job. I convinced myself that someone else had left the file there, maybe for archival sorting, maybe for a court clerk. So I returned. That night, while cleaning the judge's chambers, I found another folder. This time, it was placed deliberately on the judge's desk. My name was on the front. I didn't open it. I stood staring at it for a long time, the quiet room suddenly deafening. Then I turned and left without finishing my work again. The next night, there was no folder, no strange occurrences, just silence. Long and stretched, as if the building was waiting. I avoided courtroom 2, kept my head down, tried to pretend nothing had happened. But something had changed. I began to hear whispers. At first, they came faintly through the vents, indistinct and muffled. Over time, they grew clearer. Voices repeating names, dates, verdicts. Some whispered words in a language I couldn't place, full of clicks and low hums. Others simply wept. I recorded one of them on my phone, but when I played it back, there was only static. One night, I followed a whisper into the main hall. There, At the far end, beneath the portrait of the courthouse's founder, stood a figure. Pale suit, hat tilted forward, no features I could make out. He didn't move. He didn't speak. But when I blinked, he was gone. The only thing left behind was the cold sensation crawling down my spine. I asked the day staff if anyone had ever seen anything strange. Most gave me confused looks. One janitor, older and close to retirement, simply said, "That place remembers." He wouldn't elaborate. He just warned me to never look in the mirrors at night. I thought it was odd until I noticed that nearly every floor had an old mirror in the hallway, dusty, ornate, framed in dark wood. I started to avoid them, but one night, while cleaning the second floor restroom, I accidentally glanced at the mirror above the sink. My reflection was there, only it wasn't moving. I stepped away, but the figure stayed still. Eyes locked with mine, expression unchanged. When I blinked, my reflection smiled even though I hadn't. I turned the lights off and ran. I stopped cleaning certain rooms, made up fake logs to avoid going down certain corridors, but the building didn't let me off that easily. It started changing. Doorways would appear where they hadn't been before. A hallway that used to lead to the records room now led to a wall. One night, I found myself standing in a courtroom I didn't recognize despite working there for weeks. It had no windows, and the benches were arranged in a circle, all facing inward. I left immediately. But when I checked the blueprint map in the security office, that room didn't exist. My key ring began to feel heavier. I noticed extra keys I didn't remember having, each unlabeled, each cold to the touch. I finally went to the basement. Not by choice, but because a fire alarm triggered in the archives below. I had no choice. I descended the stairs, flashlight in hand, the sound of my footsteps swallowed by the thick air. The basement was vast, far larger than the building's foundation should have allowed. Rows and rows of old files, shelves taller than me, shadows deeper than any light could reach. The alarm stopped the moment I stepped inside, and then I heard it. A voice, deep and slow, calling my name. I turned off the flashlight. I don't know why. Maybe I thought it would make me invisible. But I could still hear it moving, heavy and deliberate, dragging something behind it. I don't remember getting out. I woke up in my car, parked outside, engine running, headlights on. I didn't go back after that. I sent my resignation in the mail. I haven't told anyone the full story, but sometimes I dream of that mirror, the smile that wasn't mine. Sometimes I hear whispers through the walls, even in my new apartment, and once, while walking downtown past the courthouse on a bright morning, I looked up and saw a pale figure watching me from the window of courtroom 2, hat tilted forward, still, silent, unmoving. I turned and kept walking. I don't look back anymore. Story number 7. I used to work as a delivery driver for a small local restaurant just outside the city. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well and gave me a strange sort of comfort, driving through quiet neighborhoods with warm food in the back seat, watching porch lights flicker on as I pulled up. Most of my shifts were late evening to midnight, and I came to know the familiar routes by heart. At midnight, I received an order that led me down a road I'd never driven before, even though it wasn't far from the main route. The GPS said it was a recently developed area, though the houses didn't look new. They looked worn, faded, like they'd been standing there for decades longer than any map admitted. The neighborhood didn't even have a name. It just appeared, tucked behind a thick patch of pine trees, the road narrowing as I drove in. The houses were spaced far apart. No streetlights, no sidewalks, just long gravel driveways that disappeared into darkness. I found the address, 421 Birch Hollow Road, though there were no numbers on the mailbox. Still, the GPS blinked and announced I had arrived. I parked and approached the porch, food in hand. The house was dark, except for a single lamp in the window. As I raised my hand to knock, the door creaked open, just slightly. I paused, unsure whether to announce myself or wait. Then, a voice from inside, thin, feminine, barely above a whisper, said, "Come in, leave it on the table." Against my better judgment, I stepped inside. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of lavender and something metallic beneath it. The house was cold, unnaturally so. A table was just inside the hallway, beneath a framed photograph of a family I didn't recognize. I placed the food down, turned to leave, but something on the photo caught my eye. The faces were wrong. The outlines were clear, but the eyes were blurred, smudged, like someone had tried to erase them. My stomach turned. I backed away and thanked the unseen woman in the hallway, though no one responded. When I stepped outside, the door closed gently behind me on its own. I hurried to my car, hands shaking. The house remained still. No light flickered. No one waved from the window. Just silence. When I looked down at the receipt attached to the order, I saw something strange. Underneath the total, in faint grey ink, were the words, "Thank you for remembering us." That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept drifting back to the photo, to the voice, to the silence that followed. The next day, I told my manager about the delivery. She frowned, confused. "Birch Hollow? That street doesn't exist anymore. We removed it from the system months ago. There was a fire, total loss." I stared at her, heart racing. She pulled up the database, and sure enough, the address had been blacklisted. "We lost a driver there a while back," she added quietly. "Never came back. We assumed he quit. I told her I had delivered there last night. She paled, told me not to joke, and asked me to clock out early. I didn't argue. I needed time to think. Later that week, curiosity pulled at me like a tide. I drove back to Birch Hollow, following the same road past the same pine trees, but this time the turn was gone. Nothing but thick forest and a crumbling fence. I drove up and down the stretch several times. No road, no mailbox, no trace of the houses I had seen. It was like the entire neighborhood had vanished. I even checked satellite view later at home. Nothing but trees, no signs of development, no houses, just a dense, unbroken patch of woods. I started to question my memory, my sanity, but then I checked my car's dash cam. The footage showed the road, the porch, even the outline of the house, but the timestamp was wrong. It said 1998. The more I reviewed the footage, the more details began to shift. The trees seemed taller, the sky darker, and in one frame, just one, there was a figure standing behind me on the porch, watching as I placed the food down. A pale face, partially obscured by the curtain. I had never seen them that night. The frame before and after were empty. I showed the footage to a friend who was into urban exploration. He recognized the house. Says it had burned down decades ago. 3 people inside never identified. All they found were scraps of a photograph. A photo with blurred eyes, warped by heat. I didn't ask how he knew. I didn't want to know. From that night on, my phone began receiving notifications at 3:12 IOM, the time I'd delivered the order. Each one simply read, "Thank you." No number, no name, just the message. I blocked the sender, changed phones, switched carriers. It kept coming, even from an old landline I had disconnected. I started dreaming of that hallway, the table, the smudged photograph. I'd wake up gasping, lavender thick in the air. One morning, I found a paper receipt tucked under my front door. It was the same one from that night, but this time, my name had been added to the family photo. My face. My eyes, smudged out like the rest. I stopped delivering after that. I found a new job during daylight hours, surrounded by people, noise, activity. But I don't feel alone anymore. I never do. There's always a sense of being observed, like someone is waiting for me to deliver something back. A memory, maybe. A promise. I see my reflection now, and sometimes it lingers too long after I move. I take a different route home each night. I avoid old roads, but sometimes I catch a glimpse of that porch out of the corner of my eye. It vanishes before I can be sure, but the lamp is always on. I've come to accept that some deliveries don't go to places, they go to moments, to echoes. And once you've made that delivery, something stays with you. Something grateful, something forgotten. And if you listen closely, when the world is still and the air is heavy, you might hear it whisper, "Thank you for remembering us." Story number 8. There was a house at the edge of our neighborhood that everyone seemed to pretend didn't exist. It sat low behind a wall of tangled hedges and overgrown trees, its roof sagging, shutters crooked and windows always dark. As kids, we called it the Quiet House, not because it was abandoned, though we thought it was, but because no matter how loud the world was around it, that house never made a sound. No birds chirped from the trees above it. No wind rustled its bushes. Even on stormy nights, the rain seemed to hush as it touched the rooftop. I walked past it every day on my way to school, always on the opposite sidewalk, never making eye contact with its blackened windows. My parents never spoke of it. I once asked my mum who lived there and she just said, "No one lives there anymore," then changed the subject and wouldn't look me in the eyes. One afternoon in autumn, my friend Daniel dared me to go up to the Quiet House's front porch. I was 12, fueled by adrenaline and the hunger to prove myself, so I agreed. We hopped the fence and pushed through the tall grass, the silence so complete it felt like I'd stepped into another dimension. As I climbed the steps, they didn't creak. The door loomed in front of me, old and heavy with faded paint and a tarnished brass handle. I knocked, just once, more for the ritual of the dare than out of expectation. But when I turned to leave, the door opened an inch. No creak, no wind, just slow movement. Daniel ran. I stood frozen. Something about the doorway felt like an invitation, not malicious, not welcoming either, just open. I leaned forward and whispered, "Hello?" No answer. Just the scent of dust and something sweeter, almost like old flowers. I backed away and didn't return for days, but something about that cracked door gnawed at my thoughts. I began to dream about it. In the dreams, I'd be standing in the entryway of the house, unable to move, as voices drifted in from other rooms. They never spoke directly to me, just to each other, in soft, echoing tones. I started walking past the house more often, even when I didn't need to. And every time the door was still cracked the same way, as if waiting for me to finally come inside. I told myself I was imagining it, that the wind had moved it, that maybe I hadn't closed it properly after the dare. But deep down, I knew better. Eventually I stepped inside, just a few steps over the threshold. The air inside was cold and dry, but clean, not the rotting stench you'd expect from an abandoned place. The floor was dusty, but the furniture was intact, covered in white sheets that seemed recently placed. There was a stillness, but not the lifeless kind. It felt like the house was holding its breath. I stood in the hallway for a long moment before turning and leaving, closing the door behind me this time. From that day on, I started seeing things. Little details, faces in windows that vanished when I blinked, shadows that curved differently than the light. I stopped telling people about it because no one believed me. They'd smile or shake their heads or pretend I hadn't said anything at all. Over time, the house began changing. Or perhaps I was simply noticing what was always there. One evening, I saw a girl in the window on the second floor. She wore a faded yellow dress and stared out toward the street with a stillness that didn't seem quite human. Her face was pale and soft, but her eyes were too dark, like they held no reflection. I didn't run, I just stood there staring back, and after a moment, she lifted her hand in a slow, deliberate wave. I blinked, and she was gone. That night, I returned in my dream. The house was different now, warmer, lit from within, filled with the scent of roses and something deeper beneath it, like wet stone. I wandered the halls, room after room, none of them matching the layout I remembered from my brief visit. At the end of the hallway, I found the girl from the window. She was sitting in a rocking chair, staring at the wall. She didn't speak. but I woke with her whisper in my ear, "Please come back." From then on, I began to visit regularly, not inside, just standing at the gate, watching. And every time, something new had changed. A curtain shifted, a lamp flickered, the hedge around the house grew lower, as if the house was making itself easier to reach. I started leaving small things by the fence, flowers, trinkets, notes. I don't know why, it just felt right. And in return, things would appear on my windowsill back home, a smooth stone I'd never seen before, a folded piece of paper with my name in looping handwriting, a key, always clean, always dry, always placed gently. I kept them in a box, tucked under my bed, like pieces of a puzzle I wasn't meant to solve yet. Eventually, I stopped questioning whether the house was empty. I knew it wasn't. I just didn't know what it contained. Not ghosts, not in the way stories tell them, something older, something tied to memory and silence, something that didn't haunt but waited. I finally asked my mother again. This time, she didn't avoid the question. She looked tired, defeated. "That house belonged to your grandmother," she said. She was strange. Always spoke to people who weren't there, said the house remembered things that others forgot. After she passed, no one would buy it. Everyone just left it alone. I asked why she never told me before. She just said, "Some places don't like to be talked about." I don't live in that town anymore, but sometimes I dream of the house again. In the dream, I walk up the porch steps and the door opens before I knock. Inside, the girl in the yellow dress walks with me through rooms that shift and grow with each step. We don't speak, we just walk, and I feel calm, as if I've come home. I always wake up with the scent of roses lingering on my pillow. Sometimes there's something new on my bedside table. An old photograph, a marble, a scrap of ribbon, and always my name written in that same looping hand. I keep them all. I think the house remembers me too, and I think, when it's ready, it will open the door again. Not just in dreams, but for real. Story number 9. I grew up in a rural part of the country where the woods behind your house could stretch for miles and still belong to no one. As a kid, the forest was a place of magic and escape, full of makeshift forts, imaginary creatures, and the laughter of neighborhood children echoing through the trees. But there was one part of the woods that none of us ventured into, a clearing deep past the old stream, where the trees bent inward and no birds ever sang. We called it the Hollow. It wasn't marked on any map, but everyone knew about it. Parents never acknowledged it, and kids only whispered about it when they thought no one was listening. And the one thing we all agreed on was this: if you hear someone calling your name from the Hollow, you do not answer. I was 13 the first time I heard it. I'd stayed out later than usual, chasing fireflies with my dog, Benny. We were near the edge of the woods when I heard my name called, softly at first, but clear. "Liam?" It was a woman's voice. Calm, familiar, but it wasn't anyone I recognized. I looked around, expecting to see someone, maybe my mother, though she never came out this far. Benny froze, ears low, tail tucked. I called out, but no one replied. Then came the second call. "Liam!" Louder, closer. Benny whimpered, pulling at his leash, trying to run. I let him lead us home, heart pounding, breath caught in my throat. I told no one. I couldn't explain it, and I didn't want to say the name of that place aloud. For weeks, everything was normal again. The voice didn't return. Benny seemed to forget, but I didn't. I stayed close to the yard, never let the woods out of my sight. Then one morning, Benny was gone. His leash was snapped, and his paw prints led straight into the woods, toward the Hollow. I searched for hours. My parents helped. We called neighbors, posted flyers, but he was never found. The day after he disappeared, I heard the voice again.
Liam.
Yes, time. It came in the middle of the night, through my bedroom window. I lived on the second floor. I sat up in bed, trembling, and stared into the darkness outside. The voice repeated, softer now, almost pleading. I closed the window and locked it, heart racing as I climbed under the covers. Eyes wide open until dawn. It began to visit more often, the voice, sometimes calling from the woods, sometimes from the basement. Once, I heard it echo through the bathroom pipes while I brushed my teeth. It always said my name, only that, never angry, never urgent, just insistent. Like it was trying to remind me of something I hadn't done yet. I tried blocking it out. I stuffed towels under the doors, slept with music playing or headphones around the house. But it always found a way through. Then one night, I followed it. I don't know why. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I missed Benny. Maybe I needed to see for myself that there was nothing there. I grabbed a flashlight, stepped through the back door, and walked straight into the woods. The path I took felt unnatural, like my feet were being guided. The forest was too still. Even the wind seemed to avoid this place. As I approached the clearing, my flashlight dimmed. The batteries were new. I shook it, but the light continued to flicker. Then I stepped into the hollow. The moment I did, everything changed. The air was thicker. The moonlight didn't reach the ground. And in the center of the clearing stood a tree, dead, twisted, and ancient. At its base, something moved. I saw Benny, or something that looked like Benny. His fur was darker, eyes hollow, tail limp. He stood, watched me, and didn't move. Behind him the voice spoke again, Liam, but this time it came from inside my head. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The clearing seemed to hum, like a distant song just beneath hearing. The shadows around the tree shifted, pulling at the edges of my vision. I stepped back, the ground soft and wet beneath my feet. Benny took a step forward, and for a second I thought he was coming home, but then he stopped. And his body crumpled into ash, just like that. A gust of wind swept through the hollow and the ashes vanished. The voice spoke once more, clear and final. Not yet. I turned and ran, branches whipping my face, roots trying to catch my ankles. I didn't stop until I saw the light of my porch. I slammed the door shut, locked every bolt, and sat there until the sun rose. After that night, the voice stopped. The woods returned to normal. Birds sang again. The grass grew where my footprints had sunk into the hollow soil. But something in me had changed. I felt watched, even indoors. Reflections in the mirror held something behind my shoulder. Dreams led me back to the clearing, always ending before I reached the tree. My parents said I was distant, quieter. I couldn't tell them what had happened. I couldn't bring it into the light. Eventually we moved to another town, a fresh start. But the hollow never left me. It waited in my memory, in the corners of silence, in the spaces between sleep and waking. And one night, years later, I heard the voice again. I was in my new apartment, half asleep, when it came through the walls, soft, steady, unchanged. Liam. And I knew then what it had always meant. It hadn't been calling me, it had been marking me. The hollow doesn't forget, it waits, it calls once, then again, and eventually it comes to collect what it believes belongs to it. And I answered.